It was completely brown on the side. We'll just go on. Ron told me to scare you, and the videos were to scare you, but. All right. So lacking that, if we get the PowerPoint, basically I took some Google Street Views, and then I show you like how the fire did or how it looked. And one of the problems that I think happened pretty quickly was all the power poles fell into the road. So when I made it to the hospital, I got into Chief Hawk's truck, and I'm like, my wife, I have no idea where my wife is. The last time we communicated was right before the fire, and we drove going the direction of my wife. We were blocked, and this is like 3 hours after the event, or maybe it was just 2 hours. I've kind of lost track. And so it was amazing how quickly travel was blocked. And if it wasn't for bulldozers pushing stuff out of the way, it might have been even worse. The other thing in the video I wanted to show was due to Sierra Nevada Conservancy funding, we had done some projects. We, the Fire Safe Council, I always say we because I want the credit. No, I'm just kidding. And around the hospital, some Fire Safe Council projects were done around a school. And I love mountain biking, and the school had some property around it and BLM. And literally when we'd mountain bike, it was like going through a tunnel of cedars and cedar sapling or sprouts. And they just cleared it out before the fire and literally probably saved the school. And some other areas along the watershed from 2 lakes. I don't know if you're familiar, but above Paradise is 2 irrigation lakes, and a lot of fuels reduction was done in that canyon with SNC grant funding. And that, I think, allowed, and Chief David Hawks believes as well, and the Fire Safe Council, that those projects saved Magalia from going completely. About half the town was lost. Do you think we'll get it back, or?
Trying to get it up on another computer. Working on it.
All right, well.
It was all working when we got.
Anyway, you're gonna go, man, that guy, he talks, but his presentation just was lacking. No signal. So maybe, Sheriff, you wanna take the reins?
If you're ready. Sure.
I think the gist, the takeaway for me from being in the thought of I'm not gonna make it, is that we got to do better on clearing roads. And that's really what this presentation is about, and doing more projects around key areas. The town is very traumatized. I asked a youth pastor at one of the churches how many folks that attend the church are needing mental health or healing, and he said 80%. Another church 100%. And so that's what's really sad is a lot of people went through the same experience I did. I was not unique. And for some reason, maybe because I had to be busy with a job and it got me through the mental problem of it, I don't seem to be super traumatized. My family isn't as well, and so that's super helpful for me. But I see it every day in people that this event has just changed their lives. And so I appreciate being here. And if you ever want to see my PowerPoint, it actually, the stuff from Callie Jane and Chief Hawks is good, and I'll turn it over to the sheriff. Thank you. Okay, are you going to introduce the sheriff? Do you want to wait, or? Well, how about we just take you, sir, before? Sorry, Sheriff. You're sure.
Publicizing of bringing the public
Yeah. So kind of the question is what does Alpine County have in place?
Well, the question is,
What do we have?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's an excellent segue into my expert, and it's his wheelhouse. I know what the Fire Safe Council and CAL FIRE have done, to present it and mail it to the community. It's surprising that every time we have an event, whether it was the Oroville Dam or this, it's like, oh, there's an evacuation plan? And we mailed it to everyone. But all right, I think you scared it into submission, Sheriff. All right, sorry for. All right, don't mess with it. Anyway, this was the view on both sides, and that's real time. That's how fast things were moving. And you'll see the car move here in a second. I don't know, 20, 30. I used to windsurf, so I really loved 25-mile-an-hour winds, and that looked like 25-mile-an-hour winds. We moved like 3 feet and then stopped again, and we're just sitting this, and the window's getting hotter and hotter. And some people, the windows just blew out. So if we want to roll through the PowerPoint real quick, and I'll just be super quick. Maybe since we got that up, try the sheriff deputy video. So I was on one side of this canyon, and down in the bottom was a sheriff deputy, a CHP officer, and what I found out later were 4 nurses. This is, I think that was 10 o'clock, around 10 o'clock. I think it's up in the corner, 9:51. So this is what it looks like when the fire is blowing over you. And my house is, they're walking towards my road. And the nurses, one of them was pretty traumatized, burned her hair. How hot? I wasn't here, but I was 100 feet from direct flames. I wouldn't say I felt hot, but to be quite frank with you, I don't remember a lot. People said I called them or they called me, and I don't even remember having the conversations. So remembering what temperature it was not in my mind. It wasn't cool, put it that way. But it's just amazing how black it is.
This is at what time? 10 o'clock in the morning.
10 o'clock in the morning, yeah. So that's a fence that's on one of my neighbors that's on fire up there. So it's literally that black. And so remember how I told you about a bulldozer that showed up to my clearing? This is the bulldozer. These people get in the bulldozer, and then there's a fire truck behind, and that's how they ended up in the clearing with me and the CAL FIRE guy and a bunch of our friends. So that was their story, pretty spectacular. I think it was a couple weeks after the hospital called me and said, hey, we're having a luncheon. We want to have people that ended up at the hospital. Because when I got back to the hospital after seeing my house on fire, sheriff deputies, probation officers, they were bringing elderly out of the woodwork. I have no idea where they were going to get these people, but they were bringing them back to the hospital. And so all of us started trying to make the elderly comfortable. I mean, dogs were on electrical cords for leashes. They were pulling them out of sheriff deputy back seats, putting them in probation vans. It was pretty intense. And so I was the only non-hospital worker invited, and they wanted to capture the stories, and they hired a writer. And the first person that started was this doctor, and she said she was at the hospital, did surgery around 6 or something. When the evacuation happened, she decided she had nothing to do there, so she drove down Pence, made a right on Pearson, and ended up in that same ravine that they were. If we can back up while I finish the story real quick. And I guess it got so intense that cars were banging into each other, cars were on fire, cars were being pushed out of the way. Keep going back. Keep going back. And then the traffic started to move. And then she was directed into a field. And there was like 3 doctors, besides the 4 nurses and the bulldozer. We all ended up in the same field. It was totally crazy. And it was nice to see that the effort helped. Oops. All right, if we can go one more slide forward. One more. So this was the ravine I was going to go into. I parked my car somewhere up here. No! Blue screen of death.
Don't let Brian run that
That's what the scene looked like. That was taken days later, but that was basically all the power poles is why Chief Hawks and I couldn't go through. And that was in that other picture. Next slide. So this is the road that the deputy and the nurses and the CHP officer were going up, and that's what it looked like. And you saw how it looked in that video. So compare your roads. I mean, that's probably pretty clear for a lot of Paradise roads. Next slide. And then one more. This is a Pence Road. Looks, compare it to yours. Looks pretty good. Next slide. That's Pence Road that was just up. I think they had a zoom is why I couldn't find the exact view. But this I drove through. When we left the hospital around 2:30, we all caravanned out. They loaded up all the poor elderly back into probation and sheriff vehicles. And this was actually my car. Somehow, Chronicle news guy snaps photo or whoever, some photographer gets me. And I was going over here to these people going, holy shit, did you just see that tornado? And it was amazing. And I'm sorry to use my words, but that's pretty much what I told the guy. And he's all, go, go. Next slide. This was the clearing. And when that fence that was on fire was here. When we pulled in, we were right about there. And so this was a house on fire and 100 feet. And that's pretty much why I've come away that we need 100 feet clearance along roads. And I have communities that love their trees, and I love trees and bushes and all that. But I think after this fire, I don't love trees and bushes that much. And so I'm sure I'm gonna have a lot of issues because PG&E is doing line clearing and people are all upset, and PG&E would be like here, and I want clearing to here. So we'll see how I survive politically, but I think it's the right thing to do to have really adequate, a lot of personal private property rights, because like probably in Alpine County, we only have easements to kind of the road edge. Some we have 30 foot from the center line on each side. But I really think we got to do something to entice homeowners along major evacuation. I'm not talking every road, but at least you can get cars and people in the center and survive. Next slide. That was a video showing a house on fire, and it was 100 feet from me. When I was in the car, I was like going, oh my gosh, this is just crazy. Next slide. So this was coming up Pearson Road where the deputy and the CHP officer were walking up. And this is what PG&E, the line goes right through down the canyon. And here's, next slide. This is what it looks like today. That's PG&E line clearing. And so, next slide. This is behind my house. And this was actually cleared around like 05, 04. And this is all the regrowth. And note this guy right here. Next slide. There's that guy and there's the sign. This is after the fire. And that's how it looks. The town has marked trees in the right-of-way, probably like this tree is marked, but everything else, there's no money, at least right now, to remove those things. And so that is just ready to burn again. Next slide. That was a drone video that kind of shows from my house to the field, and it's basically every pine tree, we're pretty much ponderosa pines, has been killed. And there might be tufts of green, and whether it's the Fire Safe Council's arborist or PG&E's arborist, they say they're likely going to get killed by the beetles. So that's what that drone video was. And it was kind of an interesting video to see the whole area where all these photos were taken. Next slide. regrowth, but you guys probably get it. This burned, and then this is how it looks today. That's actually Highway 70. Next. Success stories. This is the area that was cleared, and this was the fire line. And so this is the Fur Haven up in Magalia. And then here's the hospital area, and they did some clearing around it. All the red dots are destroyed homes. Next. This is that school I mentioned, and this was cleared around here. That's in Magalia. Next. So here's the clearing that was done. This is actually above the hospital, and this was a senior center that actually just suffered a little bit of damage. But because of that work, that survived. And this was like ground zero when it crossed the West Branch Feather River from the Concow side. Next slide. This is just Paradise Lake. Next slide. And these are some projects that were done in the watershed there. And notice that log. Next slide. And so this is after the fire, and the video doesn't show it, but it's just, it looks kind of like a natural burn went through, and the canopy is all nice and green. So that forest was saved. Next slide. Not the best, but there's pretty rugged terrain, and this was the fuels reduction, which contributed to a lot of homes surviving that have wood decks. So next slide. This was down by Lake Oroville. Some projects that were done. The first shot that we went a little too fast was, or back up. No, go forward. Sorry, we missed. Forward one more. My van is not as good today. One more. There we go. That's what it looked when they did the clearances. That's Lake Oroville here. Next slide. One more. This is what it looks like after the burn. And so a lot of it, like here's a manzanita that survived. The oaks have rebounded really quickly. And the next slide. And this is an area that didn't really get treated. And you can see that it pretty much killed all the grasses that were under the trees. And so that'll take a long time. But you guys probably already know all those things. Next. This is what it looked like, that like area that I mountain biked, which was super cool, but bad for fire. And this is what they did. And next slide. Here's a picture at the hospital loading up folks in the sheriff deputy cars. And if you've ever been in the back of a deputy car, luckily I was never caught when I was a kid. They're mighty small. I was amazed that they got 4 elderly folks per car, and it was harder to even get them back in there. So, and that's us. The hospital started burning. We were by the emergency entrance. And so we all went out and moved everyone to the helipad. And in the center of the helipad, they literally had, I mean, they were ready to operate on someone, and around the periphery were all the elderly. It was a crazy affair. So next slide. This was kind of like, you know, what can people do? Obviously, it's going to take volunteers, landowners, grants, herbivores. As you likely know, getting rid of wood products right now is a major nightmare. There's no biomass places, or there's very few. Prescribed fire, a lot of times when it's right for prescribed fire, then all your citizens are freaked out because the ground is too dry. It's a very narrow window. Enforcement's going to be a big issue. The town and the county has always never really been pushing hard on defensible space enforcement, and you know, you always get kind of someone coming up to the dais and going, well, you know, I don't have the manpower, or I don't have the money to hire someone. You're going to find me and you're going to take my property. And that's a reality. And how we find that balance, I don't have the answer yet. So if anyone comes up with a good idea, I'm open to suggestions. Next slide. What happens when we fail? This was on Concow Road, and someone posted this that I know on Facebook. I wasn't there, but imagine driving into that. I mean, you probably wouldn't. And then this could be going up next. And so that's why I'm big on road clearances. Next slide. Even though my car, again, someone used it for their GoFundMe. And this is a family that burned out, so that's what happens when we fail. People lose everything. and they try GoFundMe, and some people were pretty successful, raising like 30, 40 grand. Next slide. Loss in housing, that's just one snapshot of the area. Next slide. Loss in life. I think what's most challenging for me, you really can't see it on there, but someone died at the top of the hill, and you know, I'm always gonna think in my mind, if I didn't take a picture of that house,